Hi, thanks for joining us. This is Study Club 1, and again, it's not as important what you select here. What's more important is the notes. So that's ultimately what I'd like for you to turn in as your notes. If you do want to staple it to this, that's fine too. Okay, so let's get started. The first question says, an engineer is designing a railroad, and the tracks need to be parallel. They also said we may need to use a coordinate plane. Here's our equation, and they'd like it to go through this point. Okay, so this is similar to one we did in class, and they've just added words to it. So here we go. Question 1. Now I'm using graph paper, and if you don't have graph paper, that's totally okay, but it is very useful. And if you don't have any, you can print some off of the internet. Is an idea, but again, it's not a must. So the question is parallel, and the question says this is the equation we need to start with, and it gives us a point. Okay, very similar to some class problems. So we know here parallel means same slope. So whatever slope we come to, we're going to keep it the same. Now this doesn't tell us a slope. I'd love for it to be this too, but it's not really looking the way I need it to look. In fact, y is equal to mx plus b. We could also think of it as y is equal to b plus mx. Order here doesn't really matter if you add two things together. So ultimately, the slope is the number or the term in front of the x. And right now, we have that, but we need y by itself, and that we don't have that. So, okay. So let's get y by itself. We can subtract 2x on both sides. And we can't put the 2x under the 15 because they are not like terms. So when we do that, we have, now it's looking like this. And we're pretty close to getting y by itself. We need to divide every term by 5. And this allows 5 to be eliminated. And now y is by himself on one side. Okay. So now we recognize that the term in front of the x here is -2/5. So that is our slope of this line. We need to write a new equation with this slope through that point. So also provided to us is this point slope formula that is provided on the test. So utilizing that formula, when I take the y coordinate, the -2 we were provided, y minus the y coordinate, slope x minus the x coordinate. Now I search back and I'm not noticing any of my choices look like that. So I've got to keep going in my algebra. So I can rewrite that. We've been doing that in class. And at this point, I've got to get rid of these parentheses. So that's called distribute. So I'm going to distribute. Now here's a tricky part. A lot of students struggle. Here, this arrow is telling me to take a -2/5 and multiply it by a -4. You could also think of that as a -4/1. So when you multiply the numerator, you have a -2 times a -4, which would be a +8. All right. And then a 5 times a 1, because when you multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators and you multiply the denominators. So I have 8/5. So -2/5 times a -4 would be +8/5. All right, we're close. So now what happens is my suggestion would be kind of the opposite of what we did here earlier. See how we divided 5 by every term? I would suggest multiplying 5 by every term. So I'm going to put a 5 and a dot next to each term because I'd like to multiply 5 by each term because I think it's going to make things look a little bit better, easier to manage. So we have 5 times y. We have 5 times 2. We have 5 times a -2 and then divide by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, and that's why I wanted to do that, to clean that up a little bit. So now this term is simply -2x, And I've taken 5 divided by 5 again. And so now this is just 8. And this is really looking close to what I'm looking for in my answer. So now my answer has x and y on the same side. So I'm going to add 2x to both sides. And I can't really align it underneath there because these terms aren't alike. Now when I rewrite this, 2x, I added the 2x to this side. And then this is just 8. Pretty close to my answer. Subtract 10 on both sides. And I get a -2. Now I notice that's actually my answer choice, A. But again, what's more important is that you have these notes, not that you've circled something special on this piece of paper. Awesome. Okay, now for question 2. So question 2 states that we have a line segment with these points, and we need to find an equation that's the perpendicular bisector. Okay, so we have a segment xy, and we have coordinates for x, 5, 7, and a coordinate for y, -3, 3. Now it states I want perpendicular, and then I also need bisector. Okay, so bisector means to cut in half, and perpendicular means opposite reciprocal, or to meet, for two lines to cross at a 90-degree angle. Okay, so again, you don't have to graph this, but if you have graph paper, it would be useful. So I'm going to graph this at point 5, 7. Okay, so there's point 5, 7. And then I'm going to graph this at a -3, 3. So they said, I'd like you to take this line, and it needs to be a perpendicular bisector. So here we go. I'm going to connect the line here. And I'm noticing that it appears this dot would be perfectly in the middle. So there's a couple ways to do this, but one way is to simply take the average of these numbers. So I go over 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here I am. I'm at coordinate 1, 5. And so I found this bisector, the point in the middle, just by graphing. We also are going to do segments or sectioning, partitioning. You could have noticed that the distance between these 2 points is 8, and half of 8 is 4, so that's half. You also notice maybe this is 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so half of 4 is 2. So see how that's pointing also to the middle, the midpoint. A couple different ways to do that. Now, they want, so our midpoint is at 1, 5, and now they want me to write a new equation that's perpendicular to that. And so I believe that that would look something like this. So notice we have a positive slope, and a perpendicular would be a negative. So this is another way to notice why it is that a perpendicular means opposite reciprocal. Okay, so now I have a point. I just need my midpoint. Actually, I'm going to call that P. P for midpoint, because M is my slope. So to find a slope, it's merely rise over run, right? So if you graphed it, you notice we rose 4, we ran 8. So the slope of the purple line is rise 4, run 8, 1/2. Now, if you didn't graph it, you could have used this formula from back in Algebra 1, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the difference between the two y values, this is x1, y1, x2, y2, is 3 minus 7. And then the difference between the x values, -3 minus a 5, we get -4 over -8. Once again, we get the slope 1/2. Okay, so that's another way to do it. If you don't graph it, you can use algebra. Now we need the perpendicular slope to that. And so notice we're trying to find the equation of this line. That's what it's asking for. The equation of this line. And so we know if one is positive, to meet at a 90, one's going to have to be negative. And reciprocal means flip it upside down. So the slope of the perpendicular line has to be 2. My graph also tells me that. So -2 would be the slope. I fall 2, I run 1. I fall 2, I run 1. The slope of this line is definitely -2. Now let's come up with an equation. And it looks like I already know what the intercept is just from graphing. But another way is to do it like the last problem. So y minus our y coordinate, slope, x minus our x coordinate. So we've been asked to use this midpoint. And so we will. Our y coordinate is 5. Our slope is -2. Our x coordinate is 1. And none of our choices look like this. So we're going to keep going by distributing. -2x, -2 times -1 is +2. And the way they have this set up, they actually have the x over here. So I've been asked to add 2x to both sides. So this side now has a 2x added to it. Notice I didn't line up the 2x under these because it's a different type of term. Now I'm almost there. If I add 5 to both sides, I get 7. And voila, this is choice B. Thanks for joining us. Check out the next video.